Picture a limestone cave in the Swartkrans region of South Africa, roughly 1.7 million years ago. It is midwinter, and the air is thin, biting, and smells of damp earth and old wood smoke. A lone hominin, a distant cousin of ours, is trying to navigate the rocky floor. He isn't old by our standards, maybe in his late 20s, but his gait is heavy. Every time his left foot strikes the ground, a white-hot spike of agony shoots up his leg. There is no wound, no predator bit him, and he hasn't stepped on a thorn. Inside the metatarsal bone of his foot, a cluster of cells has gone rogue. They are multiplying with a frantic, mindless energy, eating through the healthy bone from the inside out, creating a jagged, cauliflower-like bloom of internal destruction. He doesn't have a name for it. He doesn't have a doctor. He just has the cold wind and a pain that will eventually make him too slow to outrun the leopards that haunt the cave mouth. Most of us have had that moment of health anxiety where we find a weird bump on our arm or a dull ache in our side that won't go away. We go straight to a search engine, spiral for 20 minutes, and convince ourselves that we've discovered a terminal illness before realizing it was just a weirdly shaped mosquito bite. It's a very modern kind of panic, isn't it? We live in a world of microplastics, processed sugars, and smog, so we naturally assume that the big C is a tax we pay for living in the 21st century. We have this romantic, perhaps slightly naive, vision of the ancient world as a place of pure air and organic diets where people only died from saber-toothed tigers or falling off cliffs. We like to think that if we just returned to nature, the disease would vanish. But that foot bone from the Swartkrans cave tells a much grimmer story. It suggests that while we might have invented the internal combustion engine and the deep fryer, we didn't invent the glitch in our own biology. The truth is that cancer isn't just a modern intruder. It's a stowaway that has been riding in our DNA since before we were even human. There is a very popular idea circulating in wellness communities and history documentaries that cancer is a disease of civilization. The logic seems sound on the surface. If you look at the historical record, you don't see many mentions of tumors. You see plenty of plague, smallpox, and the sweating sickness, but cancer seems to be missing from the index. In 2010, a famous study from the University of Manchester, led by Professor Rosalie David and Professor Michael Zimmerman, made headlines by suggesting that cancer was extremely rare in antiquity. They examined hundreds of Egyptian mummies and found almost no evidence of malignancy. They concluded that because they couldn't find the tumors must not have been there. This reinforced the belief that if you just eat like a Roman or live like a Viking, you're safe. But there is a massive statistical trap hidden in that logic. Imagine you're looking at a graveyard from the year 1200. You notice that almost nobody died of Alzheimer's disease. Does that mean the medieval diet protected people's brains? Of course not. It just means that almost everyone died of dysentery, infected teeth, or warfare by the time they were 35. Cancer is, and has always been, a disease of accumulation. It is a game of biological Russian roulette. Every time one of your cells divides, it has to copy its entire genetic code. Most of the time, it does this perfectly. Sometimes it makes a typo. Usually, your body catches that typo and deletes the cell. But if you live long enough and your cells divide enough billions of times, eventually a typo slips through that tells the cell to stop dying and keep growing. In the ancient world, most people simply didn't live long enough to lose that game of chance. If you die of a ruptured appendix at age 12 or a fever at 20, you never reach the age where your cellular repair mechanisms start to fail. When we look at ancient populations, we aren't looking at people who were immune to cancer. We're looking at people who were largely killed by faster, more aggressive competitors. If you want to find the cancer in the ancient world, you have to look past the averages and find the individuals who actually managed to reach old age. And when we find those rare elders, the story changes. The environment of our ancestors was nowhere near as clean as we imagine. Let's talk about fire. We think of wood smoke as a cozy, natural smell. We pay extra for hickory-smoked bacon, but to an ancient human living in a cave or a small, poorly ventilated hut, fire was a biological disaster. For at least 400,000 years, humans and their ancestors sat around open hearths every single night. They breathed in high concentrations of soot, ash, and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, the exact same carcinogenic compounds found in modern cigarette smoke. In fact, a 2021 study on the remains of hunter-gatherers from the late Pleistocene found that their lung tissues were often blackened with anthracosis, the same condition we see in coal miners. These people were essentially chain smokers from the day they were born. When researchers analyze the remains of ancient humans, they find that those who lived in cave environments often show significant damage to their sinuses and respiratory systems. It wasn't just the smoke, either. Ancient humans were exposed to massive amounts of radon gas seeping through cave floors and high levels of ultraviolet radiation from spending all day under the sun without a drop of SPF 50. They were drinking water from streams contaminated with heavy metals like arsenic or lead, depending on the local geology. Nature isn't a sterile spa. It's a chaotic laboratory of naturally occurring carcinogens. The only difference is that modern humans have added a few thousand new chemicals to the mix, whereas our ancestors stuck to the artisanal poisons provided by the earth. The bones, however, tell the most definitive story, because soft tissue like skin, lungs, and livers rots away within weeks of death. We are mostly left with skeletons. This is why the Manchester mummy study struggled to find evidence. Most cancers don't affect the bone until the very final stages of the disease. But in 2016, a team of researchers led by Dr. Edward Oades at the University of the Witwatersrand used high-resolution X-ray imaging to look at a toe bone from the Swartkrans cave. They found a classic case of osteosarcoma, an aggressive bone cancer. This wasn't a modern human. This was a member of an early hominin species, likely Paranthropus robustus. This individual lived nearly 2 million years ago. He had no industrial pollutants, no refined sugar, and no plastic. He just had the same basic biological machinery we have, and that machinery failed him in the exact same way it fails people today. Once we started looking closer with modern technology, the rarity of ancient cancer began to look more like a lack of evidence rather than a lack of occurrence. In a burial site in Sudan, archaeologists found a skeleton from 1200 BCE, the height of the Egyptian New Kingdom, that was riddled with small circular holes. These weren't injuries from a spear. They were the unmistakable signature of metastatic carcinoma. The cancer had started somewhere in the soft tissue, likely the lungs or the prostate, and had colonially expanded into the bone marrow. This person was young, likely in their late 20s or early 30s. They lived in a rural agricultural society. Yet, their body was being systematically dismantled by a malignancy that would look perfectly familiar to a modern oncologist. Even the ancient Egyptians, who didn't have microscopes or a concept of DNA, knew something was wrong. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, written around 1600 BCE, but likely based on texts from 1,000 years before that, is one of the oldest medical documents in existence. It's a remarkably cold clinical manual for a surgeon. It lists 48 different cases of injuries and tumors. Case number 45 describes a patient with bulging tumors on the breast that are cool to the touch and have spread under the skin. The Egyptian physician who wrote the text was clearly an expert observer. He noted that the growths were hard and didn't have any fluid in them, distinguishing them from common infections or abscesses. When it came to the section for treatment, the papyrus doesn't offer a magic spell or a herbal wrap. It simply says, "There is no treatment." That is one of the most haunting sentences in the history of medicine. It tells us that 3.5 millennia ago, a doctor stood over a patient, realized they were witnessing a process that was fundamentally different from a broken arm or a snake bite, and admitted total defeat. They didn't have the word cancer yet, but they understood the behavior of the beast. They knew that once these hard lumps appeared, the person was effectively a ghost. It's a moment of profound human connection, a doctor and a patient facing the same terrifying wall we still face in many modern hospital wards. But how did they explain it if they didn't know about cells? The ancient world was big on metaphors. By the time of the ancient Greeks, the no-treatment observation of the Egyptians had evolved into a full-blown theory. Hippocrates, the man we call the father of Western medicine, was the one who gave the disease its name. He noticed that some tumors had swollen veins radiating out from the center, looking like legs attached to a round body. It reminded him of a crab. In Greek, the word for crab is karkinos. If the tumor was particularly aggressive, he called it carcinoma. We still use those words today, carcinoma and cancer. Hippocrates believed in the humoral theory, the idea that the human body was filled with 4 essential fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. He hypothesized that cancer was caused by an excess of black bile that had become trapped and solidified in one part of the body. While he was completely wrong about the chemistry, his observation of the blackness was actually quite astute. Many advanced tumors do cause tissue death, or necrosis, which turns the area dark and foul-smelling. He advised physicians not to treat deep-seated tumors, echoing the Egyptian sentiment that interfering with them only made the crab angry and caused the patient to die faster. It was a philosophy of palliative care, born of thousands of years of watching people try to cut out the problem only to watch it return with a vengeance. The Middle Ages added a layer of spiritual terror to the physical pain. If you lived in medieval Europe and developed a visible tumor, your neighbors didn't see a biological error. They saw a moral one. Cancer was often interpreted as a physical manifestation of sin or a divine test. Because the disease often caused the body to waste away from the inside, it was frequently confused with leprosy or tuberculosis. People would go on pilgrimages, touch the bones of saints, and drink miracle waters in a desperate attempt to purge the evil from their flesh. But even then, the surgeons were busy. We have records from the 14th century of cancer surgeons who used caustic pastes made of arsenic and vinegar to try and burn tumors off the skin. You can imagine the agony. Without anesthesia, the treatment was often as lethal as the disease. But here is where the wow factor really kicks in. Cancer isn't even just a human problem. We have found evidence of cancer in the fossilized remains of a Centrosaurus, a horned dinosaur that lived 77 million years ago. Researchers at the Royal Ontario Museum found a massive malformed lump on the dinosaur's shin bone. When they performed a CT scan and compared it to modern human bone cancer, the results were identical. This dinosaur lived in a world with zero pollution, zero processed food, and an atmosphere completely different from ours. Yet its cells still made that same fatal copying error. This proves that cancer isn't a modern lifestyle disease or even a human disease. It is a fundamental risk of being a multicellular organism. Think about it this way. For billions of years, life on Earth was single-celled. Bacteria just do their own thing. They don't have to cooperate with anyone. But once life decided to become multicellular, to build things like trees, fish, and humans, cells had to learn to follow a strict social contract. They had to agree to stop growing when they touched another cell. They had to agree to die when they were no longer needed. This is called apoptosis, or programmed cell death. Cancer is essentially a cell reverting to its ancient selfish roots. It breaks the social contract. It decides to act like a single-celled organism again, growing and consuming resources without regard for the colony it's supposed to be a part of. We didn't catch cancer from the modern world. We inherited the possibility of it the moment our ancestors stopped being slime. The real mystery isn't why ancient humans got cancer, but why we don't get it more often. If you think about the trillions of cells in your body, and the fact that they are all dividing and copying DNA constantly, it's a miracle any of us make it to age 20, let alone 80. Your body has a guardian of the genome called the p53 gene. Its entire job is to patrol your DNA, find those typos, and either fix them or kill the cell before it can become a tumor. It is the most sophisticated security system on the planet. For most of human history, this system worked well enough to get us through our reproductive years. Evolutionary pressure doesn't really care what happens to you after you've raised your children. As long as the p53 gene keeps you healthy until you're 35, evolution considers its job done. This is why we see a spike in cancer in the modern world. It's not just that we're eating more bacon, though that doesn't help. It's that we've successfully cheated death in every other category. We conquered the predators. We conquered the infections. We conquered the infant mortality. We have essentially cleared the field so that cancer is the only major predator left standing. We are the first generation of humans to live in large numbers past the warranty period of our own DNA repair systems. We are effectively victims of our own success. But did ancient people just suffer in silence? Not necessarily. While they didn't have chemotherapy, they were excellent observers of the natural world. Many ancient cultures used plants that we now know have genuine anti-tumor properties. The autumn crocus was used by the ancient Greeks and Egyptians to treat swellings. Today, we derive a drug called colchicine from it, which is used in cancer research to study cell division. In ancient China, practitioners used happy tree bark for various ailments. Today, it's the source of topotecan, a powerful chemotherapy drug. They didn't know about the molecular pathways, but through thousands of years of trial and error, they found things that slowed the crab down. They were practicing oncology in the dark, using the only tools they had: observation and nature. The story of ancient cancer is a story of a silent, invisible war. When we look at the mummies of the Paracas people in Peru from 2,000 years ago, we see evidence of advanced surgery. Some of these mummies have holes drilled in their skulls, trepanation, that show signs of healing. They were performing brain surgery with obsidian blades. Why? Some archaeologists believe they were trying to relieve the pressure from brain tumors. Imagine the bravery required to let someone cut into your skull while you're fully conscious, driven by a pain so deep and a pressure so intense that the risk of a stone blade felt like a better option. These weren't primitive people. They were desperate, intelligent humans facing a biological enemy they couldn't see. So, when we ask, did cancer kill ancient humans? The answer is a resounding yes. It killed the warrior in Sudan. It killed the woman in the Egyptian papyrus. It killed the dinosaur in the Cretaceous and the hominin in the South African cave. It has been the shadow following our species since we emerged from the trees. Our modern world has certainly made the problem worse by adding tobacco, smog, and radiation to the mix, but we didn't create the fire. We just gave it more fuel. There's a weirdly comforting thought in all of this, believe it or not. If cancer is a modern invention, then it's a failure of our society. It's something we did wrong. But if cancer is an ancient biological reality, then it's just a part of the tragedy and beauty of being alive. It's the price of being a complex creature. It's a reminder that our bodies are incredible machines that are constantly fighting a war on our behalf, usually winning millions of tiny battles every single day without us ever noticing. We are not the first generation to be afraid of a lump. We are just the first generation with the tools to actually fight back on a molecular level. Think about that the next time you feel that flash of health anxiety. You aren't just a person in the 21st century with a search engine. You are part of a 2 million-year-old lineage of survivors. We have been staring at this crab for thousands of years, first with fear, then with curiosity, and now with the intent to dismantle it. We have gone from there is no treatment to we can fix this, and in the grand timeline of the universe, that progress has happened in the blink of an eye. The ancient world was beautiful, but it was also brutal. It was a place where you could be the strongest, fastest hunter in your tribe and still be brought down by a single cell in your foot that forgot how to die. They didn't have the luxury of understanding why they were suffering. They just had the cold, the wind, and the pain. We owe it to them to keep looking, keep studying, and keep trying to solve the puzzle that they could only describe as a crab hidden under the skin. What do you think? Does knowing that cancer is ancient make it more or less terrifying to you? Personally, it makes me feel a bit more connected to our ancestors. We're all fighting the same fundamental glitches in the matrix of life. If you find these kinds of deep-time medical mysteries as fascinating as I do, maybe stick around and subscribe. There are a lot more rabbit holes to go down, and the history of our own bodies is often the strangest one of all. Let's go back to that cave one last time. That footbone from Swartkrans isn't just a fossil. It's a testament to a very specific kind of misery. 1.7 million years ago, that hominin finally lost his battle. The leopards eventually caught up to him, or the cold got him, or the cancer simply spread until his heart stopped. The wind continued to blow through the limestone. The seasons changed. The species he belonged to went extinct, and ours took its place. But the bone remained, tucked away in the dirt, waiting for someone with an X-ray machine to come along and hear its silent scream. It serves as a definitive, chilling closing argument against the idea that we were ever pure or perfect. We have always been flawed. We have always been breaking. And that ancient, jagged bloom of bone is the proof that the disease doesn't care about your organic diet or your clean air. It has been waiting in the dark since the very beginning, and it isn't going anywhere until we finally learn how to rewrite the code that created it.